Our own son pushed us off the cliff to silence us. My husband whispered, "Pretend we're dead. They say blood is thicker than water. They never tell you what happens when that blood turns poison." The rocks below looked like jagged teeth, waiting to devour us. I should have been screaming, but all I could think about was Marcus's face, my baby boy's face, twisted with something I'd never seen before, something that made my motherly heart shatter even as my body plummeted towards certain death. "Pretend we're dead." Richard's voice cut through the wind, rushing past our ears. My husband of 32 years, the man who'd built an empire from nothing, was giving me what might be our final instruction. And God help me, I was going to follow it. But let me start from the beginning, because this story, our story, didn't begin with that fall. It began 28 years ago with a lie so beautiful, so necessary, that we convinced ourselves it was love. Chapter 1, The Golden Sun. My name is Victoria Chambers, though the society pages of Atlanta know me as Mrs. Richard Chambers III, wife of the real estate mogul, mother of the golden boy who was supposed to inherit everything. At 58, I thought I'd seen every shade of human nature. Growing up poor in Savannah, clawing my way up from a single-wide trailer to a Buckhead mansion, I believed I understood how far people would go for money. I was wrong. The morning it all began to unravel was unseasonably warm for October. I remember because I was tending to my prize-winning roses, the ones that had graced the cover of Southern Living twice, when I heard Richard's voice booming from his study. "You ungrateful piece of—" The words cut off abruptly. In our 32 years of marriage, I'd heard Richard raise his voice exactly 3 times. This made 4. I set down my gardening shears and walked toward the house, my heels clicking against the limestone pathway that had cost more than most people's cars. The Chambers estate sprawled across 12 acres of prime Atlanta real estate, but suddenly it felt small, suffocating. Through the French doors of Richard's study, I could see him standing behind his mahogany desk, the one that had belonged to his grandfather, facing our son, Marcus. Even from behind, I could read the tension in Richard's shoulders, the way his hands gripped the edge of the desk. Marcus, 28 and beautiful in that effortless way that money buys, perfect teeth, perfect hair, perfect Harvard education, stood with his back to me. His posture was relaxed, almost casual. That should have been my first warning. "Dad, you're being dramatic," Marcus said, his voice carrying that smooth confidence that had charmed teachers, professors, and debutantes since he was 5 years old. "It's not like anyone's going to find out." "Find out what?" I asked, stepping into the room. Both men turned toward me, and I saw something flicker across Marcus's face, something cold and calculating that vanished so quickly I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. "Nothing, sweetheart," Richard said, but his voice was strained. "Just business." Marcus smiled at me. That same brilliant smile that had graced his kindergarten photos and his Harvard graduation pictures. "Mom, Dad's just upset about the quarterly reports. You know how he gets." I did know how Richard got about business. Obsessive, demanding, perfectionist to a fault. It's what had built our empire from the single apartment building he'd inherited from his father into a real estate dynasty worth hundreds of millions. But this felt different. "Maybe I should leave you two alone," I said. "No." Richard's voice was sharp. "Victoria, stay. Marcus was just leaving." Our son's smile never wavered. But I caught the flash of something dangerous in his eyes. "Of course. I wouldn't want to keep you from your roses, Mom. I know how important they are to you." The emphasis on the word important sent a chill down my spine. Marcus kissed my cheek, the same sweet gesture he'd done since childhood, and walked out. I waited until I heard the front door close before turning to Richard. My husband looked every one of his 62 years in that moment, his salt and pepper hair disheveled, his usually immaculate appearance rumpled. "What was that about?" I asked. Richard sank into his leather chair, the one that had cost $15,000 and fit him like a second skin. He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. "Victoria," he finally said, "how well do we really know our son?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Outside, I could hear the landscapers working, the normal sounds of our carefully maintained world continuing as if nothing had changed. What kind of question is that? We raised him. We know everything about him. Do we? Richard opened his laptop and turned it toward me. On the screen was a spreadsheet, columns of numbers that meant nothing to me but everything to Richard's world. "This is the Riverside Project," he said. "The low-income housing development Marcus has been managing for the past 6 months." I knew about Riverside. It was Marcus's pet project, his way of giving back to the community. He'd convinced Richard to invest $12 million in affordable housing, something that had made me proud of the man our son was becoming. "The construction budget was $8 million, Richard continued. "But according to these records, Marcus has been billing us for $12 million in materials and labor." I stared at the numbers, my mind struggling to process what Richard was telling me. There must be a mistake. I thought so too, so I drove out to the site yesterday. Richard's voice was hollow. "Victoria, there are only half the buildings that should be there. Half." The words hit me like a physical blow. "You're saying Marcus stole $4 million? "I'm saying our son has been systematically embezzling from the company for at least 6 months, possibly longer. And when I confronted him just now, he laughed. He actually laughed." I sank into the chair across from Richard's desk, my legs suddenly unable to support me. The roses I'd been so carefully tending seemed absurd now. Frivolous decorations on a life that was crumbling. "There has to be an explanation," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew how naive they sounded. Richard's expression was grim. "The only explanation is that we raised a thief." "Don't say that." The words came out sharper than I intended. "He's our son." "Is he?" The question hung between us like a loaded gun. I knew what Richard was thinking, the same thought that had haunted us for 28 years, the secret we'd buried so deep we'd almost convinced ourselves it wasn't true. Marcus wasn't our biological son. We'd adopted him when he was 6 months old, through a private arrangement that had cost us a fortune and required us to sign documents promising never to reveal the truth. The adoption had been our response to 5 years of failed pregnancies, of medical procedures that left us emotionally and physically drained. When Marcus came into our lives, perfect and beautiful and hungry for love, we'd convinced ourselves that biology didn't matter. We'd given him our name, our fortune, our unconditional devotion. Maybe that had been our first mistake. "Richard, you can't seriously be suggesting that adoption has something to do with this." "I'm not suggesting anything about adoption," he said. "I'm suggesting that maybe we never really knew who Marcus was. Maybe we were so desperate for a child that we ignored the warning signs." What warning signs? But even as I asked, memories began surfacing. Marcus, at age 7, charming his way out of trouble after breaking his teacher's favorite mug. Marcus at 12, convincing his friend's parents that his friend had given him permission to take their expensive bike. Marcus at 16, smooth-talking the police officer who'd caught him drinking at a party. We'd always called it charisma. We'd been proud of his ability to talk his way out of any situation. "Victoria, I'm going to the police tomorrow morning." The words hit me like ice water. "You can't be serious." $4 million, Victoria, possibly more. This isn't a childhood mistake or a lapse in judgment. This is grand theft. I stood up, pacing to the window that looked out over the garden where I'd spent so many peaceful mornings. The roses looked different now, their beauty somehow artificial. "He's our son," I repeated, but the words felt hollow. "And he's a criminal." The silence stretched between us until the weight of it became unbearable. Finally, I turned back to Richard. Give me 24 hours, I said. Victoria. 24 hours to talk to him, to understand what happened, to see if we can fix this. Richard's expression softened slightly. After 32 years of marriage, he knew that tone in my voice, the one that meant I would fight for my family no matter the cost. One day, he said. But Victoria, if he can't explain where that money is, if he can't make this right, I'm going to the authorities. I nodded, already planning what I would say to Marcus, how I would approach the conversation that might save or destroy our family. I had no idea that by tomorrow night we would all be fighting for our lives. Chapter 2. The Son's Gamble. I called Marcus that evening, my hands shaking as I dialed his number. He lived in a penthouse downtown, a gift from Richard for his 25th birthday, but I asked him to meet me at the house. On our territory, where the family photos on the mantel and the memories embedded in every room might remind him who he was supposed to be. He arrived at sunset, driving the red Tesla we'd bought him for Christmas. As I watched him walk up the front steps, I tried to see him through Richard's eyes, to look past the maternal love that had blinded me for so many years. Marcus was beautiful. There was no denying that. Tall and lean with dark skin that glowed with health and privilege, and those striking green eyes that had been the first thing I'd noticed when we'd picked him up from the adoption agency. He moved with the confidence of someone who had never known want, never faced real consequences. Maybe that had been our second mistake. "Mom," he said, kissing my cheek with that same casual affection. "You sounded upset on the phone. Is everything okay?" I led him into the living room, the formal one we saved for important conversations and distinguished guests. The late afternoon light streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the Persian rugs that had cost more than most people's houses. "Marcus, I need you to tell me the truth about something." He settled into the wingback chair that had been his favorite since childhood, the one where Richard used to read him bedtime stories about brave princes and noble knights. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Of course, Mom. What's wrong?" "The Riverside project. Your father says there are irregularities in the budget." I watched his face carefully, looking for any sign of guilt or remorse. Instead, I saw a flicker of annoyance, quickly masked. "Dad's being paranoid," Marcus said. "The project is on track. He's just worried because it's our first venture into affordable housing." "Marcus, he went to the site. Half the buildings are missing." The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, I thought I saw something crack in his perfect facade, a glimpse of the real person beneath the polished exterior. Then he smiled, and it was like watching a mask slide back into place. "Mom, Dad doesn't understand construction timelines. We're building in phases. The missing buildings are part of phase 2. Where's the $4 million, Marcus?" The question hung in the air between us. I held my breath, praying for an explanation that would make sense, that would restore my faith in the son I'd raised. Instead, Marcus leaned back in his chair and laughed. It wasn't the warm, genuine laughter I remembered from his childhood. This was something else. Cold, calculating, almost cruel. "You really want to know?" he asked. "Yes. I invested it." "In what?" Marcus's smile widened, and I saw something in his eyes that made my blood run cold. Cryptocurrency. Bitcoin, Ethereum, some smaller coins with huge potential. I've been tracking the market for months, Mom. This was the perfect opportunity. I stared at him, struggling to process what he was telling me. "You gambled with company money?" "I invested company money. There's a difference." "Marcus, that money was supposed to build homes for people who need them, families with children." "And it still will," he said, his voice taking on the persuasive tone I'd heard him use with teachers and girlfriends and anyone else he wanted something from. "Once my investments pay off, we'll have enough money to build twice as many units. Maybe 3 times as many." I felt sick. "What if your investments don't pay off?" "They will." The certainty in his voice was terrifying. Marcus, you stole $4 million to gamble on cryptocurrency. I borrowed $4 million to make an investment that will benefit everyone. He leaned forward, his green eyes intense. Mom, you and Dad don't understand how the world works anymore. You're stuck in this old-fashioned mindset where you save money in banks and invest in bonds. The real money is in crypto. I'm going to make us rich beyond anything you can imagine. We're already rich. Marcus, not rich enough. The words sent a chill down my spine. I thought about all the advantages we'd given him, all the opportunities, all the love. When had it stopped being enough? Your father's going to the police tomorrow. Marcus's expression didn't change, but I saw his hands tighten slightly on the arms of the chair. No, he's not. Marcus, you committed a felony, multiple felonies. I made an investment with family money. There's no crime in that. There is when you don't have authorization, when you forge documents and lie to contractors. Now I saw a flicker of something dangerous in his eyes. How do you know about the documents? I didn't know about any documents. I'd been guessing, hoping to get him to admit to something. But his reaction told me everything I needed to know. Marcus, how deep does this go? He stood up, walking to the window that looked out over the city lights beginning to twinkle in the distance. For a moment, he looked like the little boy who used to stand at this same window, dreaming about his future. Deeper than Dad realizes, he said quietly. What does that mean? Marcus turned back to me, and the expression on his face made me realize that I'd been having this conversation with a stranger. The son I thought I knew, the charming, impulsive, occasionally reckless, but fundamentally good young man, didn't exist. Maybe he never had. Mom, Dad's audit only covers the Riverside project. He hasn't looked at the other developments yet. My heart stopped. What other developments? Oakwood Manor, Sunrise Estates, the commercial properties on Peachtree. Marcus's voice was calm, almost conversational. I've been redistributing resources for almost 2 years. How much? $22 million. The number hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the arm of my chair, afraid I might fall. $22 million, I repeated. Give or take. Marcus, that's everything. The company's entire liquid assets. Not everything. We still have the properties themselves, and once my investments pay off, stop. I couldn't listen to any more justifications. Just stop. I thought about Richard upstairs, probably going over more spreadsheets, discovering more theft. I thought about the families who wouldn't have homes because of our son's greed. I thought about the employees who might lose their jobs when the company collapsed. You've destroyed us, I said. Marcus shrugged. I've repositioned us for the future. The casual way he said it, as if he were discussing the weather, made me realize that I was looking at a sociopath. Maybe he'd been one all along, and our love had blinded us to the warning signs. Your father's going to the police tomorrow morning, I said, and I'm not going to stop him. Yes, you are. The certainty in his voice made me look up at him. He was standing by the fireplace now, one hand resting on the marble mantel where our family photos sat in expensive frames. Why would I do that? Marcus smiled and picked up one of the photos, the 3 of us at his Harvard graduation, all of us beaming with pride and joy. Because you're not just his wife, Mom, you're his business partner. You signed off on all the major expenditures. I stared at him, my mind racing. I sign whatever your father puts in front of me. I trust him. The FBI won't see it that way. They'll see a conspiracy, 2 people working together to embezzle millions from their own company. That's insane. I had nothing to do with this. Can you prove that? The question hung in the air like poison gas. I thought about all the documents I'd signed over the years, trusting Richard to handle the business side of our lives while I focused on charity work and social obligations. You forged my signatures, I said. But even as I said it, I realized how weak it sounded. I have dozens of documents with your real signature, Mom. Documents authorizing transfers, approving expenditures, signing off on budget changes. From the outside, it looks like you were involved from the beginning. I felt like I was drowning. Why are you doing this to us? I'm not doing anything to you. I'm protecting all of us. If Dad goes to the police, we all go down. But if we handle this quietly, as a family, nobody has to get hurt. How do we handle it quietly? You stole $22 million. I invested $22 million. And tomorrow morning, I'm going to show both of you exactly how well those investments are paying off. Marcus set the photo back on the mantel and walked toward the door. Tell Dad I want to meet with both of you tomorrow evening, somewhere private, where we can talk without interruption. Marcus. He stopped at the doorway, turning back to me with that same brilliant smile that had charmed everyone for 28 years. Mom, I love you and Dad. Everything I've done for this family. Trust me. After he left, I sat in that chair for 2 hours, staring at the family photos and wondering where we'd gone wrong. When Richard finally came downstairs, he took one look at my face and knew. How bad? He asked. 22 million. Richard sank into Marcus's chair, his face gray. God help us. Richard, he says I'm implicated. He says it looks like I was involved. My husband was quiet for a long time, his mind working through the legal implications. Finally, he looked up at me. Maybe he's right about meeting tomorrow. Maybe we need to hear what he has to say before we involve the authorities. You don't actually think his cryptocurrency investments... No, Richard said firmly, but I think we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with before we make any moves. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about the beautiful baby we'd brought home 28 years ago. I wondered if evil was something you were born with, or something that grew in the spaces where love should have been. I wondered if we'd failed him, or if he'd been failing us all along. Most of all, I wondered what he was planning for tomorrow night, and why the thought of that private meeting filled me with dread. Chapter 3: The Trap. Marcus chose the location for our meeting, Lookout Point, a scenic overlook 30 miles outside Atlanta that offered a breathtaking view of the valley below. In daylight, it was a popular spot for tourists and photographers. At night, it was isolated and dark, accessible only by a narrow mountain road that wound through thick forest. I should have seen it as a red flag. Instead, I convinced myself that our son had chosen the location for privacy, to spare our family the humiliation of having this conversation where others might overhear. Even after everything Richard had discovered, even after Marcus's chilling confession the night before, some part of me still wanted to protect him. Motherhood, I've learned, is the most dangerous form of blindness. Richard and I drove up together in his Mercedes, following the GPS through increasingly dark and winding roads. The October evening was unseasonably warm, but I found myself shivering. Maybe we should have brought security, I said as we climbed higher into the mountains. Richard glanced at me. Security? Victoria, he's our son. But I could hear the doubt in his voice. Over breakfast that morning, Richard had shown me more documents, evidence of Marcus's systematic theft spanning back 3 years. The scope of his betrayal was breathtaking. I keep thinking about when he was 12, I said, watching the headlights cut through the darkness. Remember when he convinced Mrs. Patterson that we'd given him permission to use her pool while she was out of town? He was just a kid. But when we confronted him, he didn't apologize. He explained why it was actually Mrs. Patterson's fault for not being clearer about her rules. Richard was quiet for a moment. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe we've been making excuses for him his whole life. The GPS announced that we'd reached our destination. Richard pulled into a small gravel parking area at the edge of the cliff. Marcus's Tesla was already there, parked under the lone streetlight that illuminated the viewing area. As we got out of the car, I could see the lights of the valley spread out below us like a carpet of stars. It was beautiful and terrifying, a sheer drop of at least 500 feet to the rocky terrain below. Marcus was standing at the railing, his back to us, looking out over the vista. In his dark jacket and jeans, he almost blended into the night. "Beautiful night," he said without turning around. "You can see all the way to the city from here." "Marcus," Richard's voice was firm, "let's get this over with." Our son turned around, and in the harsh light from the street lamp, I could see that he looked different. Older somehow and harder. The boyish charm was gone, replaced by something calculating and cold. "Dad, Mom," he nodded to each of us. "Thanks for coming." "You said you had something to show us," I said. "Proof that your investments were paying off." Marcus smiled. "I do, but first, I need you to understand something about the situation we're in." He pulled out his phone and showed us the screen. It was a news website with a headline that made my blood freeze. "Federal investigation targets Atlanta real estate dynasty in major embezzlement scandal." "This goes live in 6 hours," Marcus said calmly. Richard grabbed the phone, his eyes scanning the article. I read over his shoulder, my heart sinking with every word. The story laid out Marcus's theft in excruciating detail, but it presented it as a conspiracy involving all three of us. There were quotes from anonymous sources claiming that Richard and I had been living lavishly off stolen money for years. "This is lies," Richard said. "Complete fabrication." "Is it?" Marcus asked. "Dad, you signed off on every budget approval. Mom, you authorized the transfers. From the outside, it looks like a family conspiracy." "Because you forged our signatures." "Can you prove that?" Marcus's voice was maddeningly calm. "Because I can prove that both of you have been taking money from the company for personal expenses. That trip to Paris last month? Company funds. Mom's jewelry. Company credit card. The renovations to the house. Company accounts." I stared at him in horror. Those were legitimate business expenses. We entertain clients. We need to maintain appearances. The FBI won't see it that way. They'll see a pattern of financial abuse going back years. Richard handed the phone back to Marcus, his hands shaking with rage. "You set us up." "I protected us. All of us." "By framing us for your crimes?" Marcus walked closer to us, his green eyes reflecting the streetlight. "By making sure that if I go down, we all go down together. It's called mutually assured destruction, Dad. Nuclear powers use it to prevent war." The cold calculation in his voice made me realize that this conversation wasn't going the way any of us had expected. Marcus hadn't brought us here to confess or ask for forgiveness. He'd brought us here to make threats. "What do you want?" I asked. "I want us to leave the country tonight." "What?" Marcus pulled out a manila envelope and handed it to Richard. "Plane tickets to the Cayman Islands. From there, we take a private jet to a country with no extradition treaty. I've been planning this for months." Richard opened the envelope, his face growing paler with each document he examined. "Marcus, this is insane. This is survival. In 6 hours, that story goes live. By tomorrow morning, the FBI will have warrants for all of our arrests. Our only chance is to disappear." "I'm not running," Richard said firmly. "I didn't do anything wrong." "Neither did I, technically. I moved money around within a family business, but that's not how the prosecutors will see it." I found my voice. "Marcus, you can't seriously expect us to abandon everything, our home, our friends, our entire lives, because of your crimes." "Our crimes," he corrected. "And yes, that's exactly what I expect. Because the alternative is spending the next 20 years in federal prison." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and the distant sound of traffic from the highway below. I looked around the deserted overlook and realized how isolated we were, how far from help. "What if we refuse?" Richard asked. Marcus's smile never wavered. "You won't." "Yes, we will." "No, Dad, you won't. Because if you refuse to come with me, I'll make sure that story includes some very specific details about where the money really went." "What does that mean?" Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a tablet computer. He swiped to a series of photographs, holding the screen so we could both see. The photos showed Richard meeting with various people, business associates I recognized, city officials, men in expensive suits whose faces I didn't know. But the context was damning. Envelopes changing hands, briefcases being passed across restaurant tables, handshakes in parking garages. "What is this?" I asked. "Insurance," Marcus said. "Dad, you've been paying bribes for 15 years. Building permits, zoning variances, tax assessments. None of our success was legitimate." Richard's face went white. Those weren't bribes. Those were consulting fees. Perfectly legal. Tell that to the grand jury. I stared at the photos, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. "Richard, is this true?" My husband was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's how business gets done, Victoria. Everyone does it." "Not everyone gets caught," Marcus said cheerfully. "But you did. I've been documenting your activities for 3 years. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. "You've been spying on your own father?" "I've been protecting myself. See, when I first started moving money around, I needed leverage in case things went bad. Insurance, you might call it." I looked at Richard, at the man I'd loved and trusted for 32 years, and realized I didn't know him at all. "How long?" I asked. "Victoria, how long have you been paying bribes?" Richard's shoulders sagged. "Since the beginning, since we bought our first property. It's the only way to navigate the system." "You're a criminal." "We're all criminals," Marcus said. "The only difference is that I'm honest about it." I felt sick, dizzy, like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. Everything I'd believed about our family, our success, our moral foundation, all of it was built on lies and corruption. "So you see," Marcus continued, "you really don't have a choice. We leave together, or we all go to prison together. But either way, we stay together as a family." Richard grabbed Marcus by the shoulders, and for a moment, I thought he might hit him. "You manipulative little—" "Careful, Dad." Marcus's voice was perfectly calm. "You wouldn't want to do something you'd regret." "I already did something I regret. I should have let you rot in whatever foster home you came from." The words hung in the air like a curse. I saw Marcus's mask slip for just a moment, saw genuine hurt flash across his face before the cold calculation returned. "But you didn't," he said quietly. "You brought me into your family. You gave me your name, your fortune, your criminal empire. And now we're going to face the consequences together." "I'm not running," Richard repeated. "I'd rather go to prison than spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. And I'd rather not go to prison at all." The conversation had reached an impasse. I could see the stubborn determination in Richard's face, the same expression he wore when negotiating business deals. I could see the cold resolve in Marcus's eyes, the look of someone who had planned for every contingency. "There has to be another way," I said. "Some kind of plea bargain or—" "There is no other way," Marcus said. He pulled out his phone again and showed us a different screen. "This is a dead man's switch. If I don't check in every 12 hours, that story gets published automatically, along with all of Dad's bribery evidence." "You're blackmailing us," Richard said. "I'm saving us." The three of us stood there in the cold mountain air, our family torn apart by greed and betrayal, and 28 years of lies we'd told ourselves about who we really were. Finally, Richard spoke. "I need time to think." "We don't have time." "The plane leaves in 4 hours." "Then the plane leaves without us." I saw something change in Marcus's expression, a flicker of something dangerous. "Dad, you're not thinking clearly. You're letting pride cloud your judgment." "My judgment is perfectly clear. I'm not running." Marcus nodded slowly, as if he'd expected this response. I was hoping it wouldn't come to this. Come to what? Instead of answering, Marcus walked back toward his car. For a moment, I thought he was going to leave, drive away and abandon his plan to force us into exile. Instead, he opened his trunk and pulled out a tire iron. "Marcus," I said, my voice sharp with warning, "what are you doing?" He walked back toward us, the metal weapon casual in his hand. "I told you, Mom, we're staying together as a family." Richard stepped in front of me, his body shielding mine. "Put that down." "I will, as soon as you agree to get on the plane." "You're threatening us with violence?" "I'm making sure we all survive this." The standoff lasted only seconds, but it felt like hours. Richard protective and defiant, Marcus calm and determined, and me finally understanding that the son I'd raised was capable of anything. "Marcus," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "we're your parents. We love you." "I know," he said. "That's why this is so hard." He moved faster than I could have imagined, swinging the tire iron at Richard's head. My husband ducked, the weapon missing him by inches. "Run, Victoria!" Richard shouted, but there was nowhere to run. We were on a narrow overlook surrounded by forest and darkness, with a 500-foot drop behind us and our armed son blocking the only exit. Marcus swung again, and this time the tire iron connected with Richard's shoulder. I heard the crack of bone breaking. "Stop!" I screamed. Marcus looked at me with those beautiful green eyes that had once filled me with such joy. "It doesn't have to be like this, Mom. Just say you'll come with me." Richard was on his knees now, clutching his injured shoulder. Blood was seeping through his shirt. "Please," I begged. "He's hurt. He'll heal, in the Caymans, with the best medical care money can buy." I realized then that Marcus had crossed a line there was no coming back from. The son I'd loved, the child I'd raised, the boy I'd dreamed about long before he came into our lives, that person had never existed. I'd been in love with a fantasy, a projection of my own desperate need for family. "Okay," I said. "Okay, we'll go." Marcus smiled, his face brightening like sunrise. "I knew you'd see reason." Richard looked up at me from the ground, confusion and betrayal in his eyes. "Victoria, we'll go," I repeated. "Just please don't hurt him anymore." "I won't have to." Marcus reached down to help Richard to his feet, and that's when my husband made his move. Despite his injured shoulder, he lunged forward, tackling Marcus around the waist. The tire iron went flying, clattering across the pavement toward the cliff edge. The two men struggled, Richard's desperation matching Marcus's youth and strength. I stood frozen, watching my husband fight my son. Two people I loved destroying each other while I did nothing. Then I heard Marcus laugh. "You never could beat me at anything, could you, Dad?" With a brutal efficiency that terrified me, Marcus broke free of Richard's grip and shoved him backward. Richard stumbled, his injured shoulder throwing off his balance. He windmilled his arms, trying to regain his footing, but momentum carried him toward the railing. "Richard!" I screamed. My husband's eyes met mine for one last moment, and I saw love there, and forgiveness, and a desperate urgency. "Don't trust him," he shouted, and then he was gone. The railing gave way with a grinding screech of metal. Richard disappeared over the edge, his scream cutting through the night air before being swallowed by the darkness below. I ran to the broken railing, leaning over as far as I dared. "Richard! Richard!" There was no answer, only the sound of wind through the trees and the distant echo of falling rocks. Marcus stood behind me, breathing hard. When I turned to face him, I saw no remorse in his eyes, only calculation. "That wasn't supposed to happen," he said, but his tone was matter-of-fact, like he was discussing a minor change in dinner plans. "You killed him." The words came out as a whisper. "He fell. He was fighting me, and he fell." "You pushed him." I defended myself. "He attacked me with a tire iron, remember?" I stared at my son, this stranger wearing my son's face, and realized he was already constructing the narrative, already planning how to explain Richard's death. "Now it's just you and me, Mom," Marcus said, moving closer, "just like when I was little." The casualness of his words, the complete absence of grief or shock, finally shattered the last of my illusions about who Marcus really was. "You're a monster," I said. His smile faltered for just a moment. "I'm practical. Dad would never have adapted to life on the run. He was too proud, too set in his ways. But you're different. You're a survivor." "I'm not going anywhere with you." "Yes, you are." Marcus picked up the tire iron from where it had fallen. The metal gleamed in the streetlight, and I could see Richard's blood on one end. "Because if you don't, you'll have an accident too. A tragic fall, just like Dad's. Two grieving parents, overcome with guilt about their son's crimes, deciding to end it all together." The plan was already formed in his mind. I could see it in his eyes, how he would stage the scene, what story he would tell the police, how he would inherit everything as the sole surviving family member. "You've been planning this all along," I said. "Not all along, but I've been preparing for various contingencies. I learned that from Dad. Always have an exit strategy." Marcus stepped closer, herding me toward the broken railing. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely think. "The crypto investments," I said, desperate to buy time. "Were any of them real?" "Some of them. I'm not stupid, Mom. I did make some money, just not enough to cover what I took." "How much is left?" "About $2 million. Enough for us to start over somewhere warm and beautiful." "Us?" "You and me. A mother and son, refugees from a tragic scandal that destroyed our family business." I was almost at the edge now. Below me, I could hear nothing. No sign of Richard, no indication whether he was alive or dead in the darkness. "People will ask questions," I said. "The FBI, the insurance companies, let them ask. By the time they figure out what really happened, we'll be long gone." Marcus raised the tire iron, and I knew I had seconds before he struck. That's when I heard it, a voice from below, weak but unmistakable. "Victoria!" Richard was alive. Marcus heard it too. His head snapped toward the broken railing, his confident expression flickering with uncertainty for the first time all evening. "Impossible," he muttered. "Help!" Richard's voice echoed up from somewhere in the darkness. "Victoria, help!" Without thinking, I lunged for Marcus's phone, the one with the dead man's switch. If I could disable it, if I could stop that story from being published. Marcus spun around, swinging the tire iron at my head. I ducked, and the weapon whistled past my ear. "Give me the phone!" I shouted. "Not happening!" We struggled for the device, both of us fighting with desperate fury. Marcus was stronger, but I had the advantage of pure maternal rage, not for him, but for Richard, who was somewhere below us, hurt and alone. The phone flew out of our hands, skittering across the pavement toward the cliff edge. We both dove for it at the same time. I reached it first, my fingers closing around the smooth metal case. But Marcus grabbed my wrist, trying to pry my hand open. "Let go!" he snarled. I held on with everything I had, even as his grip threatened to break my bones. The phone screen was cracked, but still functional. I could see the dead man's switch app, the timer counting down. 4 hours and 17 minutes until the story went live. Marcus twisted my arm behind my back, sending fire through my shoulder. "Give me the phone, Mom. Don't make this harder than it has to be." I tried to enter the app to find some way to disable the timer, but Marcus yanked my arm harder. Pain exploded through my whole body. "I'm sorry," he said. And for a moment, he almost sounded like the little boy I'd once loved. "I really am, but I can't let you ruin this." With his free hand, he grabbed the tire iron again. I closed my eyes, waiting for the blow that would end everything. Instead, I heard Marcus scream. I opened my eyes to see Richard pulling himself over the broken railing, blood streaming down his face, his left arm hanging uselessly at his side. But he was alive, and he was furious. "Get away from my wife," he growled. Marcus spun around, raising the tire iron. "You should have stayed down there." "Probably, but I've never been good at doing what I should." Richard charged, tackling Marcus around the waist with his good arm. They went down hard, rolling across the pavement toward the overlook. I scrambled for the phone, my hands shaking as I tried to navigate the app. There had to be a way to cancel the timer, to stop the story from being published. Behind me, I could hear the sounds of the fight, grunts of pain, the clatter of the tire iron on pavement, Marcus cursing as Richard fought with the desperate strength of a man who had nothing left to lose. "Victoria!" Richard's voice was strained. "The phone!" I found what looked like a settings menu, but it required a password. I tried Marcus's birthday, our anniversary, his social security number. Nothing worked. A shadow fell over me. I looked up to see Marcus standing above me, the tire iron in his hand. His face was cut and bruised, his perfect features marred by Richard's desperate resistance. "I really didn't want it to end this way," he said. He raised the weapon, and I knew this was it, the moment when our son would kill us both to protect his escape plan. Then Richard spoke from behind him, his voice calm and clear. "Marcus," he said, "look at me." Our son turned, and Richard hit him with a chunk of concrete he'd picked up from the broken railing. The impact was solid and final, and Marcus crumpled to the ground. For a moment, the overlook was silent except for the sound of our breathing and the distant whisper of wind through the trees. Then Marcus stirred, groaning as he tried to push himself up. "Stay down," Richard warned, but Marcus was already moving, scrambling toward the tire iron. "You don't understand," Marcus said, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. "If that story publishes, we're all finished, all of us." "Maybe we deserve to be finished," Richard replied. "Speak for yourself." Marcus grabbed the tire iron and swung it at Richard's legs. My husband went down hard, his injured shoulder hitting the pavement with a wet crack. "Stop!" I screamed, but Marcus was beyond reason now. The calm, calculating facade had cracked, revealing something wild and desperate underneath. He raised the tire iron above Richard's head, preparing to deliver a killing blow. I did the only thing I could think of. I threw myself at him, knocking him off balance just as he swung downward. The tire iron missed Richard by inches, striking sparks off the pavement. Marcus and I tumbled together, rolling toward the edge of the cliff. I felt gravel sliding beneath us, heard the sick, grinding sound of the broken railing giving way further. "Mom!" Marcus's voice was suddenly young and scared, like the little boy who used to have nightmares. "Help me!" I looked down at him, this child I'd loved for 28 years. This stranger who had tried to kill us both, and felt my heart break one final time. "I can't," I whispered. We were at the very edge now, both of us balanced on crumbling asphalt with 500 feet of empty air below. I could feel the ground shifting beneath us, ready to give way completely. "Please," Marcus begged, "I'm your son." "No," I said, and meant it. "You never were." I let go of him. Marcus's eyes went wide with shock and betrayal as he slid backward over the edge. His hand shot out, grasping for mine, for the railing, for anything that might save him. For just a moment, his fingers caught the broken metal of the railing. "Mom," he said, and his voice was small and lost. "I'm sorry." Then the railing gave way completely, and Marcus fell into the darkness with a scream that seemed to go on forever. I lay on my stomach at the edge of the cliff, staring down into nothing. Below me, I could hear the sound of falling rocks, then silence. Richard crawled over to me, pulling me back from the edge with his good arm. "Is he, I couldn't finish the question. "I don't know." We held each other in the pale streetlight, two broken people who had just watched their son, adopted or not, loved or not, disappear into the night. "The phone," Richard said suddenly. I still had it clutched in my hand, the screen cracked but functional. The dead man's switch was still counting down, 3 hours and 42 minutes. "Can you disable it?" Richard asked. I shook my head. "It needs a password." Richard took the phone, his hand steadier than mine despite everything. He tried several combinations, his face growing more grim with each failure. "We need to call the police," I said. "And tell them what? That our son embezzled $22 million, tried to blackmail us, and then fell off a cliff when we fought back?" I thought about how it would sound to investigators. A family meeting that turned violent, a young man who conveniently fell to his death just as his crimes were about to be exposed, two parents who claimed self-defense but had no witnesses to back up their story. "They'll never believe us," I said. "Maybe they will, maybe they won't." Richard's voice was heavy with exhaustion and pain. "But we have to try." That's when we heard it. A voice from below, faint but unmistakable. "Help! Somebody help me!" Marcus was alive. Richard and I looked at each other, neither of us moving. "We could leave," I said quietly. "Drive away. Let someone else find him tomorrow." "Victoria, he tried to kill us, Richard. Both of us. And if we save him, he'll destroy us with that story." My husband was quiet for a long moment, staring out over the valley lights. When he spoke, his voice was infinitely sad. "If we leave him here to die, what does that make us? Survivors. Or monsters." The word hung between us like an accusation. I thought about Marcus's cold calculation, his willingness to murder his own parents to protect his scheme. I thought about the families who wouldn't have homes because of his greed, the employees who would lose their jobs when our company collapsed. But I also thought about the 6-month-old baby we'd brought home from the adoption agency, the toddler who'd called me Mama for the first time, the child who'd crawled into our bed during thunderstorms. "Help!" Marcus's voice was weaker now, more desperate. "Please!" Richard struggled to his feet, favoring his injured shoulder. "I'm calling 911. "Richard, don't. I have to. If you make that call, we lose everything. Our freedom, our fortune, our reputation, everything we've built over 30 years. Maybe we were never supposed to have it in the first place." I stared at my husband, this man who had paid bribes and bent rules and built an empire on corruption, and realized he was trying to find some shred of decency in the wreckage of our lives. "You're right," I said finally. "Call them." Richard dialed 911, his hands shaking as he explained our location to the dispatcher. While we waited for help to arrive, we sat together at the edge of the overlook, listening to our son's increasingly faint cries from the darkness below. "I keep thinking about that first day," I said. "When we brought him home from the agency. He was so small. Perfect. I thought he was perfect. Maybe he was then. Maybe we broke him." I considered that possibility, that our love had somehow been toxic, that our wealth and privilege had corrupted an innocent child into the monster who had tried to destroy us. Or maybe some people were just born broken, and no amount of love could fix them. "The story," I said, remembering the phone still clutched in my hand. "It publishes automatically in 3 hours. Let it." I looked at Richard in surprise. "You're giving up?" "I'm facing reality. Marcus documented everything, the bribes, the embezzlement, all of it. Even if we could stop this story, there are copies somewhere. Other evidence. It's over, Victoria." Below us, Marcus had stopped calling for help. Either he was unconscious, or he was dead, or he was conserving his strength. I found myself hoping for the latter, not because I wanted him to survive, but because I wanted him to suffer first. The thought shocked me with its cruelty. "What kind of person does that make me?" I asked aloud. "Human," Richard said. In the distance, we could see flashing lights winding their way up the mountain road toward us. Police, ambulance, fire department. The cavalry arriving to clean up the mess our family had made. "Are you ready for this?" Richard asked. I thought about the questions they would ask, the investigations that would follow, the media circus that would destroy what was left of our reputation. I thought about trials and lawyers and prison sentences. Then I thought about Marcus, somewhere in the darkness below us, and realized that whatever happened next, we would face it together. "Pretend we're dead," I said, remembering Richard's words from what felt like a lifetime ago. "What?" When Marcus pushed us off that cliff, when we fell into the darkness, pretend we died. The people who built their lives on lies and corruption and willful blindness, let them stay dead. Richard squeezed my hand with his good arm. And then we figure out how to live as whoever we're supposed to be now. The first police car crested the hill, its headlights sweeping across the overlook. In a few minutes, our old lives would be officially over. But maybe, if we were very lucky and very honest, we might be able to build something real from the wreckage. Epilogue. 2 years later. The federal courthouse in Atlanta was exactly as cold and imposing as I'd imagined during those sleepless nights after Marcus's fall. Richard and I sat in the defendant's section, wearing our plain clothes and humble expressions as the judge read our sentences. 2 years in minimum security prison for tax evasion and conspiracy to commit fraud. We'd pled guilty to lesser charges in exchange for our cooperation in the broader investigation of corruption in Atlanta's development industry. Marcus had survived his fall with a broken back and 2 shattered legs. He'd made a deal, too, 10 years in federal prison in exchange for testimony that brought down half the city council and 3 state senators. The tire iron, it turned out, had DNA evidence that supported our version of events. Self-defense, the prosecutors agreed, though they couldn't overlook our complicity in the financial crimes. The story had published as scheduled, destroying our reputation and triggering the federal investigation Marcus had tried to prevent. But ironically, his detailed documentation of our crimes had also provided the evidence needed to take down the entire corrupt system we'd all been part of. Richard lost 70 pounds in prison and learned to repair small engines in the workshop. I taught literacy classes to other inmates and discovered I had a talent for helping people learn to read. Neither of us had ever done anything so genuinely useful in our entire lives. The Chambers estate was seized and sold to pay restitution to the victims of our crimes. The rose garden I'd been so proud of was torn up to make room for a playground. The property had been donated to the city for a public park. I was glad. On the day of our release, Richard and I stood together outside the prison gates. 2 old people with gray hair and lined faces and no money to our names. The media had moved on to other scandals years ago. Nobody was waiting to interview us or take our picture. We took a bus to a small apartment in a part of Atlanta we'd never visited when we were rich. 1 bedroom, thin walls, neighbors who worked 2 jobs to pay rent they could barely afford. It was the most honest place I'd ever lived. Marcus was still in prison, serving his sentence in a facility 800 miles away. We'd had no contact since that night on the cliff. The adoption agency had sealed his records, so we still didn't know where he'd come from or who his birth parents were. Maybe it didn't matter anymore. Richard got a job as a maintenance worker at a local community college. I found work at a literacy center helping adults learn to read. Our combined income was less than we used to spend on flowers for a single dinner party. But it was enough. We were enough. On our first anniversary of freedom, Richard brought me a single rose. Not one of the prize-winning varieties from our old garden, but a simple pink bloom from the grocery store that cost $3. "I love you, Victoria," he said, and I knew he meant the woman I'd become, not the woman I'd pretended to be for 30 years. I love you too. We'd lost our son, our fortune, our reputation, and our illusions about who we were. But we'd found something more valuable, the ability to look at ourselves in the mirror without flinching. The local newspaper ran a small story about our release, buried on page 6 between the weather forecast and the grocery store ads. The headline read, "Former real estate magnates begin new life after prison." They got it exactly right. We weren't rebuilding our old life or trying to reclaim what we'd lost. We were beginning again, from scratch, as the people we should have been all along. Sometimes, when I'm walking home from work through neighborhoods where people struggle to pay rent and keep food on the table, I think about that night on the cliff. I think about the moment when I had to choose between saving my son and saving my soul. I think about Marcus. somewhere in a prison cell, probably still convinced that he was the victim of circumstances beyond his control. And I think about Richard's words, spoken in the darkness as we fell toward what we thought was certain death. Pretend we're dead. We did die that night, in a way. The people we used to be, the corrupt businessman and his willfully blind wife, the wealthy couple who'd built their empire on lies and called it success, they died when Marcus pushed us off that cliff. What survived was something smaller, poorer, and infinitely more real, something worth living for.